Ethan, what's happening? Let's check out your train beats. All right, so we got no click 1 and 2 with click 1 and 2. Here, let me rearrange these real quick. Let's go with click first, no click 1, with click 2, no click 2. I'm not sure which order you did these, but for whatever reason, it kind of makes sense to me to listen to them in this way. I guess because usually when I'm practicing in this way, I'll practice with the click first and then turn off the click and kind of record both and then listen back in A-B. So I guess that's why I chose that. So let me grab my mixer just in case we need it. And even though, thanks for sending the click. Even though you sent the click, I'm going to listen to all of these without the click. And let's just listen through each one, and then I will comment. So here's the first one with the click. Okay, so first quick little note, you recorded too hot, right? These are all peaking a little bit. You can see down here, so whatever, no big deal for this. We're just sort of grabbing a quick recording just to learn from. We're not keeping these, but if you wanted to keep these, they're useless because they're peaking. Okay, so I heard some differences between all of these. I think it's good to listen back for yourself sort of critically, and I'm wondering what you think of these, but you're not here next to me, so we can't really have this conversation in real time. But let me tell you what I think. So I think the first takes of both of these were the most solid. Your second takes were not as solid. So for whatever reason, a lot of times they say, in a recording session, a lot of times the first take is the best take, and I think a lot of times they say that because it's like there's like a freshness to it, and there's an energy to it, and a certain amount of fear amongst the musicians, because it's like first take and they want to get it right or whatever, and then sometimes like you get to the second take and the musician is already maybe a little bit bored or that at that point, or they're not as interested because they already did it once. But anyways, let's check out this one with the click again, the first one here. So this transition here is a little wonky. I think in all of these, let's check this out. Yeah, and so by wonky, I mean it's kind of it's the accented subdivisions on your snare drum. They're a little rushy, a little stiff, and they have maybe a little bit more swing. They're a little bit more swing than we want. They're a little bit too close together, slightly. It's just kind of a drastically different feel from the first one. And this is happening in both your click version and your non-click version. It was actually the transition into it on your non-click version was pretty damn smooth, but then like by the second bar it went back to that little bit of wonkiness I was talking about. Let's finish the rest of this no click. Actually, let's just listen to the whole thing again. Changed my mind. Let's just listen to this transition. So what I was talking about here, you pretty much nailed the first bar. We're getting super critical, and I think it's valuable to point this out to you right now. It's subtle, but you know, in a real recording situation, these two are very different. And if you were a bass player, for example, or any other musician trying to lay down a rhythm part to these drum parts, you would have to approach your part very differently because the feel is different, even though the tempo is exactly the same. So let's just listen to that transition, going from the first groove just right into that second groove that's a little bit wonky, and let's compare the click version of that transition and the non-click version of that transition. And what I'm saying is that the non-click version here was actually really smooth and it wasn't wonky until the second bar. Whereas I think in this click version up here, it was sort of wonky right from the get-go. So here we go. So you can hear this is just a little more rushy, and the subdivisions are a little too swingy and close together. Whereas this one, at least the first bar, is pretty damn clean. Let's take it from the beginning so we have a little more time to hear that. I'll do the same thing. Yeah, so I'm hearing that for sure. The first bar here of that transition, the whole bar isn't bad. Let's see if we can pinpoint that a little bit. Actually, the first two beats are nice. It's the second half of the bar, those two snare accents, that kind of change the feel of everything. Whereas in this bar, I think the whole bar is good. Let's listen to that. Yeah, it's it's not perfect, but it's definitely better than this one up here. So okay, let's hang out on this one and let's see if we can hear any other things worth mentioning in the rest of this. But let's go from the beginning again. Okay, so this is a really nice take, actually. I basically have no major issues with the whole rest of this. Let's go back to this one just for a second. So, to me, the first bar was the cleanest in terms of feel, the least wonky, the least different from the feel that you had established in the first groove. And actually, the second bar, third bar, fourth bar are very consistent. It's pretty much the same feel and groove, so that is good. But it's a little bit wonky, right? It has that little rushiness to it. So really, this groove, the first bar is different from the second, third, and fourth bars, which are all kind of the same. See if you can hear that. Yeah, so that's totally happening. I know this is like getting into some subtle shit, but you know, we're developing our ears to be able to hear this stuff. And like I said, in a real recording situation, the difference between this bar and these three bars is enough to mess up the recording in one way or another. As far as the next two grooves in this one, I think the feel on the third groove here was super solid. The one on the fourth groove, the feel of this, I'd say was like maybe an 8 out of 10. It was good, but slightly wonky in places. The only thing I'll say about this third one is that your backbeat snare drum sound and pitch is not consistent. Which, you know, for a train beat in a maybe rootsy Americana kind of song or whatever, like, that's fine. But if it were a pop kind of thing, like, yeah, I mean, if you were playing this on a John Mayer tune, which there's a lot of John Mayer tunes with train beats on them, John Mayer would probably have a problem with that because it's more pop and they want the snare to sound the same and basically have the same pitch all the way through. Otherwise, you know, someone would have to go in and edit all of those snare drum 2s and 4s to make them all sound the same, which they don't want to have to do, of course. So here, just listen to your snare backbeat, and you can hear that it sounds different kind of every time you hit it. Especially like the second half. The first half of the phrase was pretty good. The second half of the phrase, it's a slightly different sound, and you can hear the pitch going up and down from here. Especially in here. So those first two from that, right? The first one's higher in pitch and the second one's lower in pitch, pretty drastically. Right? And then let's listen to the last one real quick. Yeah, so the kick was really nice and consistent. and it had a little bit of swing to it, which I don't mind. I thought it was cool. Maybe the last bar, the kick changed a little bit in terms of consistency. And then same thing with the snare and this one, the sound and pitch of the backbeats were all a little different. Okay, so I'm going to wrap up this video in a second, but since we now understand this 30 seconds of drum beat right here really, really well, let's compare that to the one down here, the other one that you did without a click. And I bet we're going to hear some difference there. Okay, so yeah, let's look at this for a second. I'm hearing the first groove. It's pretty good, but the tempo moves a little bit more than the first groove up here. I feel it sort of speeding up and slowing down in a little amounts. Sorry, I had to let my dog out. See if you could hear that. It's kind of it's not that bad really, but it's mostly like the placement of your kick drum, especially towards the end of the phrase. One of those kick drums rushes a little bit, and that's enough to make the whole groove sound like it's speeding up. This kick drum in here, there's some kick drum in the second, in the first bar. So like the first bar and the fourth bar, the kick drum's not super precise. Now, this would be enough to piss off a bass player working in this style, because they're going to be doing like a Route 5, like country bluegrassy bass line kind of thing that follows the kick drum. So if your kick drum is not super committed to its placement, the bass player is not going to be happy with you. So the second groove here, I heard this as just being more inconsistent than the one we had up here. Each bar was a little different, whereas up here, 3 of the bars were the same, and the first bar was different. Listen to that. Yeah, just in terms of feel and like subdivision, they're all a little bit different. Let's listen to this groove. That's pretty good. Maybe not quite as solid in terms of feel as the one up here, and it has the same snare sound issue. And then the last groove. Yeah, same thing. Just the kick drum is not super committed to its amount of swing. There's places in here where the kick drum swings a little bit more probably than it should, based upon your commitment within the first bar. So if we compare it to this one up here, this one had a very consistent amount of swing, consistent spacing in your kick drum subdivisions, and this one down here did not. So let's listen to that. So I hear this, the first bar is pretty similar to what you had up here for the whole thing. And then the second bar and the third bar, the kick swings a little bit more. And then the last bar, the first half of the bar swings a little bit more, and then it flattens out a bit in the second half of the bar. See if you hear that. Yeah, it's sort of just like maybe lack of commitment, or for whatever reason you just weren't feeling it this time. Lack of commitment to the feel that's going on in your body. Whereas up here you had that commitment, or maybe you got lucky. But down here, the kick, as we just said, is kind of moving around. And because of that, the snare placement is also kind of moving around a little bit, and the sound isn't super consistent. So, cool. I will stop ripping you apart for now. But nice work. All in all, these sound much better than the video you sent me last week. So just being aware of these little things, I think helped a lot. And then I should also just mention, it really just, I think it comes down to a commitment to the feeling of the groove that you're playing. And in order for it to feel good, it has to be comfortable for you. So I'm sure you could still say that some of these grooves are more comfortable than the others. And then at that point, it just comes down to practice, really. So A, get super comfortable with the groove you're playing. B, commit to that feeling in your body and just go with it and trust it. And I mentioned this because we just went through and ripped you apart and got super microscopic and pointed out all these little details. And it's good to do that once in a while because you learn from it. But we just want to make sure that while we're actually playing and making music, that we don't get like paranoid about all these little tiny details. To be fair, especially in a live situation, you probably wouldn't even hear this stuff that we just looked at. And, it's basically good to go. But, like I said, if you were recording for John Mayer, it would be a different story. And it's the solution is just the commitment to the feeling of the groove and not getting super uptight about all the little details while you're actually playing. Hope that makes sense. All right. See you soon.